Okay, I'm going to pick up where we left off, and we'll look at Christian humanism, particularly in the North, and what is really the difference between Christian humanism and Italian humanism. Because the reality is they're both concerned with bettering society, they both read the classics, but one of the key differences between the two is its strong emphasis on in the Italian Renaissance with the rediscovery in the recreation of the Greco-Roman world, where in the Northern Renaissance, there's more interest in reforming society, making it a better place, but really this belief that it has to necessarily be recreated. And the Northern Renaissance is just, like everywhere else in Europe, is impacted powerfully by the crisis of the late Middle Ages and the corruption of the church. But as we move further away from Rome, the more those issues and calls for reform become louder. And for the North, there's a sense that they're sick of moving that money and their independence and over religion and in their political areas to Rome. And so there's calls for reform of the church, there's calls for reform of society. But Christian humanists are a little bit different in that they're not as completely secular as Italian humanists. They like the values of Christianity, and they want to use the values of Christianity to reform society. So when you look at like More, for instance, More is a devout Catholic, and he weaves into Utopia Christian values, although you never actually see the church firmly established, but the values of justice and equality and those sorts of things are weaved in as a model for reforming society. Erasmus talks about the need to live a pious life and in praise of folly, that the problem with society all stems to corruption within the church and immorality with church followers. So the essential beliefs of a Christian humanism or a humanist is a person should focus on living an ethical life or a moral life. And when you read in Praise of Folly, he just literally calls the monks and the popes out and says the problem with their corruption, the cause of the Great Schism, the cause of all these terrible things that have happened are a lack of morality and ethics. But it must be said that they still believe in the logic and reason and achievement of human beings that we see in humanism. And they're still, for them, the classical texts are important and are important examples. So they almost believe that there should be a melding or a combination of the classical world and in perfect Christian ideals for the betterment of society. You're going to see this in Thomas More's Utopia as you read it. In Utopia, for Thomas More, as a Christian humanist philosopher, he really believed that the world could be reformed by comparing it to what it's not. And so Utopia is a juxtaposition with the modern world, with this perfect world. Utopia has become that term. At the time, it meant no place. The idea was, here's a place where there's pure values that we could find within the beliefs of Christianity. Societies are organizing itself among it and creating a better society. Erasmus is the other great Christian humanist from the North we're going to look at. Erasmus of Rotterdam. We're going to mainly focus on his works, his work in Praise of Folly. He became what is known as the greatest intellectuals of his time and read across Europe, including in Italy. And he predates Luther, but is a great inspiration for Luther because some of the arguments he brings up with the corruption of the church are going to be echoed. Oftentimes people, as you read this, I want you to keep this in mind, oftentimes people think of Luther as hatching the egg that was laid by Erasmus in this work. And for him, it was all about this idea that there had to be a pious life that had to be brought about in order to reform society. And I think he summed up Christian humanism really well in this quote. He said, "I brought it about that humanism, which among the Italians savored of nothing but pure paganism, began to nobly celebrate Christ." And what he meant by that was this idea that you could use the values of the rediscovery of Greece and Rome combined with a pure, pious Christian belief and create a better world. And he did it with some scathing and oftentimes entertaining writings, as you can see in Praise of Folly. One of the other themes of the Renaissance we want to look at is with literature and reading, and it's the growth of the vernacular. And if you remember, Petrarch was never a huge fan of the vernacular. Even though vernacular was starting to come into play in the late Middle Ages with Dante and Geoffrey Chaucer, writing in the vernacular is really important. And it shows us two things. One, it shows us that merchants are a growing class and they're a growing literate class. They needed to keep records. They needed to write letters to each other. And so they are striving to read books. And so there's an audience which is appealing to read in the vernacular. On the other side, as more and more books are written in the vernacular, it's going to drive the desire to become literate, especially after the printing press, which we're going to look at. But the vernacular is interesting in that it reaches other people outside of the church. And the second thing it does is it starts to lay the foundation of modern languages. So, for instance, modern Italian is based on Tuscan, which is found in Dante. Another great example of vernacular writing in the Renaissance is Luther's translation of the Bible into German. That dialect starts to become the foundation of modern German because people have to be able to read it. And so they have to learn it. And as they learn it, it starts to disseminate across Europe. So we're going to see a lot of that. So even though Petrarch resisted it and wanted a pure form of Latin, in the end, in modernity, in the modern world, we're going to see that writing in the vernacular is going to become key. And writing in a language such as Latin that the church wrote in a dead language is going to start to fall out of place of the learned people. And that's then as literature and literacy slowly increases, is going to reach larger and larger numbers of people. And this can't be emphasized enough. When we talk about the influence of the Renaissance on the modern world, that is one of the most key points, that literature is going to disseminate knowledge, and that knowledge is going to be started to consumed by larger and larger and larger masses, the pure characteristic of the modern world. And so with that, we have to move to one of the greatest inventions of the Renaissance, one of the greatest inventions of human history, and coming out of the Northern Renaissance in Germany, and that's the movable type printing press. In the Middle Ages, books were handwritten. Now with movable type, which was first invented in China and abandoned because of their symbols, there's thousands of symbols. It was so complicated. But in a purely phonetic alphabet, the movable type printing press makes a lot of sense. And when Johann Gutenberg introduced his printing press, it made copying books very easy. With the introduction of paper production over using vellum or parchment, now we have mass production of books. And what this did was disseminate knowledge in a way that had never been seen before. And Gutenberg, this invention and its dissemination did two things. It empowered the powers that be because they could send out propaganda and all these sorts of things. But at the same time, it served to empower the people. And we're going to see this in the Northern Renaissance. And we're also going to see with the Reformation, the Northern Renaissance, is their inability to control printing. So knowledge becomes very, very difficult to control and as it disseminates. And at the same time, the invention also created a demand to be able to read. And so it was almost cyclical. More people were able to read as they moved into the merchant class, fueling the need to create this invention. And once the invention is created, the knowledge is disseminating, books are being spread, and it drove people to want to be able to read them. And we're going to slowly start to see the building of what becomes known as the literacy revolution, which is only going to speed up with the Protestant Reformation and then beyond. And so, in a way, books are out there that have never been seen, and some of those books are not necessarily accepted by the political and religious powers. So we're going to stop there, and you're going to go look at Thomas More and as well, and you're going to look at Utopia. And, we're going to analyze those the sources and Praise of Folly.